Well, good morning to you. How are you all doing this morning? It's fine morning. Good to see you. Hopefully you met somebody amazing around you. And if you're like, man, I didn't meet anybody amazing, you're wrong. They are amazing. Change your expectations. We have an amazing church full of amazing people who gather. And today we're talking about the power all day long, the power of being together and living as people who look back at God's faithfulness, look forward to the kingdom to come, and find joy in the present. And so thank you for joining us today for worship, whether you're online or back with us in person. It is a joy to be together. My name is Danny. I serve as senior pastor here at the church. And if you are new with us, we would love to help you get connected. Our passion up here coming out of this pandemic season is to transform the East Bay with the gospel of Jesus Christ. And we believe that that will happen as we gather together and worship Him as His people, as we are equipped to grow in our faith and be equipped to live the life He has for us, and as we go into our workplaces, into our schools, into our communities to bring the presence and power and message of Jesus Christ wherever we go. And so we'd love to help you with that. If you are wanting to get on mission with Jesus, maybe you need to find a place to connect. We'd love to help you find a place to connect. We've got stuff going on all over the place that can equip you in your faith, allow you to meet some folks, get connected. Our small groups ministry just started for this season. We've got a lot of places. So we'd love to help you. You can check out our website. You can even just come to the lobby and find somebody. We'd be happy to help you get connected in this world we live in together. Well, we have been designating this time before we dive into God's Word each week to do two things. One, to receive our tithes and our offerings. Even though we haven't been passing the plates in our services, I just want to point out to you that if you came prepared to give today, we've got our offering boxes in the lobby, we've got our online options going, and while we've been having this time of giving, we've been taking a moment to celebrate things that God is doing in our midst and around the world. So if you've been with us this year, we've celebrated the way that God brought in the gifts that we needed to finish out 2021 strong in our general fund. We celebrated that in January and February. We celebrated the work that God is doing around the world through our missions program. We got to hear some staggering numbers in terms of the amount of funds going around the world and the amount of impact that God is having around the world through our missions partners. Just a few weeks ago, Pastor Mark had to share that. Today I wanted to take a moment to celebrate some things that God is doing right here in our midst, because just this last weekend and in the weekend to come, God is preparing just some amazing things happening. We've got our women's ministry night of prayer and communion happened last Friday. Was anybody there? 120 of you were there. So raise your hand, make some noise. It was amazing. I was not invited. But that's a joke, because I'm not a woman, and it's a women's ministry event. And if you feel like that's inappropriate, I'll make the same joke in a second when I talk about our men's ministry. But we had a women's ministry night of prayer and communion, and what I loved about the photos and the videos and the testimonies that I heard is that as we've started this series called A Church That Pleases God, and as we finished this last series talking about being healthy and thriving, all of the things that happened at our women's ministry night of prayer and communion came right out of what the scriptures say healthy community looks like. Right, there's women experiencing fellowship and breaking of bread with one another. They got to open the scriptures and hear from Tara Hannon as she shared with them. They got to eat some bread that was baked by someone in our midst. Is that true? That's not true? I heard you bake bread. Did you not? They didn't. They did? They did. Okay, she doesn't want any credit. Don't look down here. Don't look at anyone who doesn't want credit. And they did that with humility, not wanting credit for anything, right? And it was a beautiful night. If you were there, you know it. If you missed it, check out the next women's thing that's coming up. I saw Lisa out on the bricks today talking about If Gathering coming up in March. We'd love to help you get connected. The women's ministry for women is a place where you might grow in your faith, like our small groups, our life group ministry. If you are a man in here and you're feeling left out, we've got a big gathering for men this Thursday night. We've got our bare knuckle barbecue session part 2 coming this Thursday night. It'll be a different vibe than the prayer and communion night. So I'm sorry if you were expecting that. That's not what's going to happen. This is a little bit of a different focus, because where that event was an amazing event to get women together to experience the fellowship of Christian community and invite some friends along the way, the men's ministry event this weekend is planned primarily to reach out to folks who are far from God, who are not part of a church, or are not connected with our men's ministry yet. So if you've got friends at work, or friends at your kid's school, or friends at your school that need to get connected in Christian community, this Thursday night, bare knuckle barbecue sessions, part 2. I don't know what part 1 was. I missed part 1. Part 2 is this Thursday night. I believe there will be ribs that will be barbecued. Did you say I love ribs? I love that. I love that. Great. So that's coming up. I don't know. That's coming up this Thursday night. If you want to grab a ticket for that, you can check out Justin and some men's ministry guys out in the lobby today, or jump online if you're watching online. You can come on up. Those events are great times to come back up and get reconnected. So we are celebrating because God is doing work when we gather together in His presence, in His name, under His authority, to open His word and to share His message with the world. And so whether you are a woman or a man, there are great opportunities for you to connect in this season. So we celebrate that. Last week, we started a series called A Church That Pleases God. And we started with this concept of what is a church, right? We talked about the church as a community that gathers under the authority of Jesus Christ to bring glory to Jesus Christ, according to the will of Jesus Christ, for the pleasure of Jesus Christ. And then I said, hey, next week, we're going to take a pause and talk a little bit about the humanity that needs to exist within the local church context. And so I'm so delighted to introduce to you guys our guest speaker today, who's a pastor by the name of Jay Kim. And Jay is the pastor of a church called WestGate Church. He actually was installed as the lead pastor last Sunday. So this is your first Sunday as lead pastor of WestGate, and he's opening the word with us today here. That's down in Saratoga, South Bay, if you've ever been down there. If you live down there and you're watching us online, stop watching online, go to WestGate. It's right in your neighborhood. Go to WestGate Church down in the South Bay. Jay wrote a book that came out 2 weeks after the pandemic started, end of March 2020, called Analog Church, talking about the power of in-person Christianity in an increasingly digital age. So before the pandemic, Jay and I sat down. I said, Jay, I would love for you to come talk to our people about this concept, the power of humanity, because I just feel like this world is becoming increasingly digital, and things like social media and online church are poisoning our souls. And then we started a worldwide global pandemic where everything went digital. And I thought, we're either going to learn that Jay is wrong, and there's no value in being with humans, or we're going to learn that he's right. And really, we would say we learned that God is right when He designed us to be in community with one another. And so we had a date scheduled for Jay to come out. It was during shelter in place. We pulled the plug and then plugged in the plug, and I preached to you on a camera. And I said, as soon as this thing is over, we'd love to have you back, because I'd love for you to be able to share these thoughts with our church. So in the meantime, a couple things have happened. One, Jay has written another book that comes out this summer called Analog Christian. You can pre-order that on Amazon if you'd like. Also, walking through 2 years of the pandemic, we got to learn at a little bit deeper level just the loneliness and anxiety and joylessness that comes with only being glued to our devices all day long. And so we're going to do two things today. Today in our services, Jay's going to open the scriptures and talk to us a little bit about losing and finding joy in a digital age. And then tonight, anyone who's interested, in our chapel at 6 p.m., we're going to host a seminar that's open up to any church leaders or members around the Bay, talking about this concept of being an analog Christian, an analog church, a church that really leverages the power of humanity in its gatherings and in its philosophy. So all are welcome tonight. I'll tell you more about that later. But will you put your hands together and give a warm 3 crosses welcome to Jacob?
Thank you. Thanks, Thanks. Thank you guys so much. Such a joy. Danny, thank you. You read the script just as I wrote it, so thank you. I'll buy you that Starbucks later. No, it's an honor to be with you all today. Seriously, I really mean that. As a follower of Jesus in the Bay Area and as a pastor, I have watched this community from afar for a long while with much admiration, and I am so grateful for the ways in which you all are shining light into the darkness of the East Bay and beyond. And when you go to a church and you're a part of a church, for those of you who've been a part of Three Crosses for a while, I think that sometimes we just kind of get adjusted and everything feels normal. But I just want to tell you, as an outsider looking in, how blessed you are to have Danny as your pastor and the incredible team of leaders who are here to serve you and shepherd you and lead you. This is a beautiful, beautiful church community led by a man that I admire and respect greatly. So you all are in great hands, and I'm just so encouraged by all of you. Yeah. Like Danny said, I want to talk a little bit about joy. And to begin, I want to tell you a bit about myself. My wife, Jenny, and I have been married for 13 years. We just celebrated 13 years in January. And we have, thank you. and we have 2 young kids, a 6-year-old and a 3-year-old. So if you do the math there, you will note that it took us about 6-7 years before we were able to have children. Now, not everybody wants children, and that's perfectly fine. But for us, we wanted children, and we wanted children actually pretty early on. Like after we got married, we were like, man, we'd love to have a little one around here. And it took us a while because when we began trying to get pregnant, we ran into this brick wall called infertility. And my guess is that in a room this size with this many people, my guess is that there are some of us, maybe many of us, who know what that's like. And if you do, man, there's a connection, right? Because infertility, amongst so much grief in life, infertility is quite unique. It feels like this dark cloud that just constantly hovers and rains on you day by day. And that lingered for us for about 5 years. We wrestled. And I distinctly remember that season of our life. I remember a sort of constant trajectory that I felt myself going through, like this cycle, this dangerous and destructive cycle I found myself in during those 5-6 years that just felt relentless. And the cycle sort of went something like this. It would begin when I would scroll social media, my Instagram or my Facebook. And Jenny and I had these dear friends of ours who were our age, sort of in the same season of life. They had gotten married right around when we had gotten married, and they were beginning to post these like really fun, celebratory, we're expecting in January, a little one coming in July, these incredibly celebratory, really beautiful posts on Instagram and Facebook. But something really strange happened. These are people that I loved, people that I considered dear friends. And rather than being able to celebrate with them and rejoice with them, you know what I found myself doing internally? I found myself comparing. Like I couldn't celebrate. I couldn't experience joy. I just saw these posts and I thought, well, why them and not us? In my comparison, it began to lead to contempt. It got really dangerous. These people that I love and care about deeply, rather than celebrating with them and rejoicing with them, I felt internally in my soul real contempt toward them. And I didn't know why. I couldn't figure it out. These are people I love, and why do I feel so much contempt? And that contempt eventually turned into what I called self-centric despair. Self-centric because it felt like I just put blinders on and all I could think about was my own emotions, my own feelings, my own struggle, my own darkness. And it felt like despair. Like this bottomless pit I was falling down that I would never get out of. And then that self-centric despair eventually gave way to a loss of joy. I found myself living a joyless life. Now, whether you have experienced the pain of infertility or not, again, in a room this size, with this many people, and for those watching online, my guess is that you can at least relate to the trajectory. And I'll show it to you up here on the screen. You begin to compare your life, maybe your lowlights, against the glossy highlights of other people, typically on your social media feed. Instagram, Facebook, maybe Twitter, or whatever. And you begin to compare, and you realize in some strange way that their life is not like your life. And you ask the question, why is my life the way it is when their life looks so grand and beautiful and perfect and pristine? And that comparison leads to contempt. You start feeling this internal contempt toward these people on your feed. And often, destructively, these people on your feed are like real people in your lives. Not always, sometimes they're not, but often they are. And you carry this contempt, this private, personal contempt inside of you toward them for no good reason at all. And then that contempt leads you to self-centric despair. You start looking at all of your life as just a series of lowlights. You wonder when your life is going to turn for the better. And it feels like despair, like you're just spiraling down a bottomless pit. And eventually that gives way to a loss of joy. You feel joyless. This happens on social media. It happens just in our consumption of media in general, and it happens because of the strange circumstances in which we find ourselves often. Right now, for sure, but even before the pandemic and shutdown and all of that, there were these seasons of our lives, circumstances and situations that were seemingly beyond our control that would throw us into this vicious cycle of comparison, contempt, despair, and a loss of joy. In the late 90s, a British psychologist named Michael Eysenck, he coined a phrase, the hedonic treadmill, to describe this sort of cycle so many of us find ourselves in. And the word hedonic is just the adjective of the word hedonism. The word hedonism, essentially, it means like the unabashed, relentless pursuit of pleasure. Michael Eysenck is not a Christian, he's a psychologist, but he basically said that in the modern Western world that you and I are all a part of, in the modern Western world, we have, for the most part, become addicted to hedonism or addicted to pleasure. That for many of us living in the modern Western world, our lives are oriented around chasing pleasure. And we may not call it that, and often we don't even think of it as pleasure. We think that it's joy that we're chasing. Because deep down in the human soul, what every person wants is joy, like real, abiding, undergirding joy that is strong enough to last and sustain us through whatever comes our way. But we have translated that in the modern world into pleasure. We think that what will get us joy is pursuing pleasure, the stuff that essentially feels good. We think of joy as a spark. How many of you guys are fans of Marie Kondo? Any Marie Kondo fans in here? Yeah, a handful. Okay, my wife is a Marie Kondo fan, and she would tell you that Marie Kondo has changed our lives because we fold our laundry differently now or something, right? Now, Marie Kondo, if you don't know who she is, she's like this global sensation, and she kind of leans toward like minimalism and decluttering your house, and she's really good at like organizing your home, all that kind of stuff. And her whole concept is based on these two words, asking yourself the question, does this spark joy? That's what she says. And that's the delineating line. When you declutter your house, you come across an item, and you think to yourself, do I still need this? You're supposed to ask yourself the question, does this item spark joy? Interesting. Now, this is all well and good if you're talking about old t-shirts and underwear, right? Does this old shirt spark joy? No, discard, right? Pretty simple. The problem is, one of the reasons why Marie Kondo's concept has become so popular, and this is no shade at Marie Kondo, I'm sure she's changed your life and she's a wonderful person. But the problem is, the reason that question, does it spark joy, is so popular in today's day and age is because it's already a question we're already asking. You already filter most of your life's decisions through that lens, whether you know it or not. It's the lie that culture has sold us. This is why when long, fruitful, beautiful marriages come to a screeching halt and a husband and a wife divorce one another, often you will hear them say something along the lines of, well, the spark is gone. So the spark is gone, therefore I'm going to discard the marriage. Asking the question, does this spark joy, is all well and good, again, when it comes to Tupperware. But it's not only not good, it's destructive if we think of the most meaningful stuff of our lives, like our relationships, our faith, our commitment to one another as brothers and sisters in Christ. When we ask that question to the most meaningful things of life, we are heading down a dangerous road. We find ourselves running on the hedonic treadmill, and it is a treadmill because the constant pursuit of sparks leaves you running but going nowhere. And you just find yourself exhausted. Because sparks are not joy. And so, what is joy? If that thing that culture wants us to chase on the treadmill, sparks, these good feelings, if that's not really joy, then what is joy? That's the question. For followers of Jesus, we have to ask the question, not what does culture sell us as joy, but what does God himself say about joy? What does he say to us through his word, the scriptures, about what real joy actually is and how we might experience it and live with it on a day-to-day basis? First, the word joy in the Hebrew scriptures, what we often call the Old Testament, there's several words translated joy. The most common is the Hebrew word simha. And the Hebrew word simha, it's found almost 100 times in what we call the Old Testament. And simha, joy, most commonly refers to a person's state of being when they are in close proximity to God. Simha is not a word that describes good feelings based on circumstances. Simha, joy, in the Bible, Old Testament, is a word that describes the state of being of an individual as they live in close proximity and connection to the God of the universe. Psalm 16, in your presence, God's presence, there is fullness of simha, joy. Psalm 21, you, God, make him glad with the joy of your presence. These are just two out of dozens and dozens of examples where the word joy, simha, is described as the state of being of an individual when they are in close proximity to God. The word simha also is used to describe God's posture toward you. How God feels when he thinks about and draws near to you and to all of his creation. Psalm 104, may the Lord rejoice in his works. Zephaniah 3, the Lord your God is in your midst, a warrior who gives victory. He will rejoice over you with gladness. He will renew you in his love. He will exult over you with loud singing. The Lord finds so much joy with you and in being close to you. He sings over you. I mean, imagine that. Now, joy in the New Testament also, there are several words translated into the English word joy. The most common is the Greek word. Greek is the primary language of the New Testament. And the most common word in the New Testament for the English word joy is the Greek word hara. Now, hara it describes several things. One, it describes an internal state of being in the life of one who has the Spirit of God in them. The most well-known example is probably Galatians 5, where Paul writes about the fruit of the Spirit. You guys know this passage, some of you, yes? What does he say? Galatians 5:22, the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, hara, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, self-control, right? He goes on and on. But joy is one of the attributes of the fruit of the Spirit within us. And the word hara is a word, joy, that it's detached from exterior, external circumstances and situations. It's a word that actually describes a sort of steadiness within because of the goodness of God, not because of circumstances. Let me show you a couple of examples. Colossians 1, the writer Paul, he says this, now I rejoice, hurrah, in what I am suffering for you. Listen, if joy is a spark of pleasure that you chase, Paul's words here make zero sense. No sense whatsoever. I rejoice in what I am suffering for you makes no sense whatsoever if joy is good feelings, correct? And then the writer of Hebrews describes Jesus this way, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith, for the joy, hurrah, set before him, he does what? He endured the cross, an instrument of brutal, violent death. What Jesus does makes no sense if joy is just about pleasure or good feelings or a spark of butterflies in the stomach. But that's not, biblically speaking, what joy is. Joy is this inner state based on the goodness of God, not on circumstances, that is able to withstand and undergird and strengthen you in the midst of even suffering, even death on a cross. That's joy, biblically speaking. The writer Dallas Willard describes it this way. He says that joy is not a passing sensation of pleasure, but a pervasive sense of well-being that is infused with hope because of the goodness of God. Let's just take a moment and breathe that in, because there's a lot here. Joy is not a passing sensation of pleasure. In other words, joy is not the hedonic treadmill running and chasing after sparks that feel good. Rather, joy is a pervasive, all-encompassing, all-consuming sense of well-being that is also infused with hope because of the goodness of God, not because of circumstances or situations, or because your social media feed looks just as glossy and nice as everybody else's. And so, to summarize, biblically speaking, joy is several things. Joy is our state of being when we are connected to God. In other words, the location of joy is not a mystery. Live closer to God and live closer to joy. Biblically speaking, joy is God's posture toward his people. God rejoices over you. Biblically speaking, joy is the result of the Spirit of God's work in our lives. If you want to experience real joy, true joy, lasting joy, strong joy that doesn't waver because times are tough, then you need the Spirit of God to bring to bear that sort of joy in you. It is not something you can manufacture on your own. And finally, biblically speaking, joy is an inner steadiness built upon the goodness of God, not on our circumstances. You have to believe that as pandemics come and go, as job opportunities come and go, as relationships come and go, as feelings of happiness come and go, as the butterflies in your stomach come and go, you have to believe that God is good through it all. What this means is there's immense hope, even when life is hard. Even in the midst of sorrow and pain, joy is possible. There's this misunderstanding in culture that Christians are just ignorant people who live with dumb smiles on their faces. They're just happy all the time. But if you just read the Bible, what you know to be true is that's not the case. That God's invitation is not for you to be a happy person and then come to him. Rather, God's invitation is for you to come to him with all of your sorrow, all of your pain, all of your grief. Like if you're here today in this church and you felt uncomfortable coming because life is hard and you can't put a fake smile on your face, and you wondered to yourself, should I still go to church? Because church is where the happy people go. Let me tell you very clearly and emphatically, that is not true. That's what culture believes churches are supposed to be. That's not the way God designed the church to be. God invites all people with all of their pain, with all of their hurt, all of their sorrow, all of their successes and their failures, all of their wins and their losses, to come and be his people. Eugene Peterson put it this way: joy is not a requirement for Christian discipleship. You do not have to be a joyful person to follow Jesus. But this is what's really profound. It is a consequence. Joy is not a requirement for Christian discipleship, but it is a consequence. Follow Jesus for long enough, and in the midst of your pain and sorrow, you will experience a strange joy. It is not what we have to acquire in order to experience life in Christ. Joy, is what comes to us when we are walking in the way of faith and obedience. You want to experience real joy? A real joy that is deeper and truer than the glossy Instagram feeds that pose as joy? You want to experience real joy? Then walk for the long haul in faith and obedience to Jesus. Jesus himself says in John 16, what does he say? Ask and you will receive, and your joy will be complete. Romans 15, Paul writes, may the God of hope fill you with all joy. And even in the midst of our sorrow and pain, God offers us true joy. We ask and God gives joy. And in our struggle, the God of hope can fill us with joy. And this is why we read in James chapter 1, count it all joy, my brothers and sisters, when you meet trials of various kinds. Cultural versions of joy, the sparks of good feelings and pleasure, cannot withstand this sort of truth. Pleasure and sparks of good feelings cannot possibly count themselves as joy when you meet trials of all kinds. Trials and struggle and pain and loss and grief crush pleasure, but joy can withstand whatever comes your way. That phrase, count it all joy, in the original language, in the Greek, is actually a single Greek word, and it's a math word. Like literally a mathematical word. What the writer of James is saying is, when you face trials, when life gets hard, when you are struggling, when you experience loss and grief and pain, do the math. And when you do the math, you will discover joy. What is that math? Hardship, pain, loss, grief, plus Jesus equals joy. Culturally, though, pleasure, good times, good feelings, money, wealth, the right relationship, the right house, the right retirement, the right vacation, minus Jesus equals despair. Always. That's the math. This is backwards from what we are sold on social media. Social media wants you to believe that in 3 quick clicks or swipes, you can find joy. And I promise you, what you will find there is not joy, but pleasure that leads to despair. Only Jesus offers us joy that can truly withstand the struggles and the pains of life. And so how do we do this math? The writer, Eugene Peterson, he puts it this way. He says that just as joy builds on the past, it borrows from the future. What does he mean? I'll show you a slide here trying to explain. Here's how we do the math and count it all joy in the midst of our present trouble. When we focus all of our energies on the present, when we fixate on the present with all of its uncertainties, anxieties, and worries, we are compelled to chase pleasure to medicate the uncertainty, anxiety, and worry of the present. That's typically what happens. If all you can see is what is happening now and what you do not know and what you cannot figure out and the problems you cannot solve, typically the human tendency is to medicate the uncertainty and all of the pressure through pleasure. Just stuff that makes me feel good so I don't have to feel all the other messy stuff. But if you want to do the math and live and experience real joy in your life, then according to Peterson, and I agree with him here, what you have to do is think beyond the present. First, you have to look into the past. Because when we are reminded, when we remember and are reminded of all God has done in our lives and throughout history, when we see how He has been faithful to His people through pandemics before, and world wars, and economic collapses, and the loss of marriages and loved ones, and hopes and dreams, we see that God has always been faithful. We remember the past, and that leads us to joy in the present. And we also look forward to the future. We look at the scriptures and we read, like the final book of the Bible, Revelation, where it tells us that there is a day coming when Jesus will return to rule and reign as king forever. And on that day, according to Revelation, there will be a new heavens and a new earth where there is no more crying, no more tears, no more pain, no more sorrow, no more mourning, no more death. And we look to that future, and no matter what trouble we have in the present, we know how the story ends, and it leads us to joy. Tim Keller puts it this way, that while other worldviews lead us to sit in the midst of life's joys, foreseeing the coming sorrows, Christianity empowers its people to sit in the midst of this world's sorrows, tasting the coming joy. I mean, there's also a missional, evangelistic bent to this. What would it look like for those of us who are followers of Jesus to live with this sort of joy in a joyless world? I mean, how might your coworkers and your neighbors and your unbelieving friends and family and your banker and your barista, how might they possibly be drawn just a few steps closer to Jesus as they peer into your life and begin to ask the question, how? How does that person have so much joy in such a joyless world? There are several ways to do this, but I want to leave you with a few practical notes. 3 questions, in fact, that I would encourage you ought to replace more common questions that so many of us ask. Questions that lead us to true joy. First, rather than asking the question, God, how can I experience joy more consistently? What if we were to ask the question, God, how can I experience you more consistently? If true joy is found in connection and proximity to God, then what we know is that trying to find joy is the wrong pursuit. If we can find God and remain closely to Him, what the Scriptures make clear to us is that joy will be found there, right alongside the God who loves us and rejoices over us. Instead of asking the question, how and where can I find joy? Maybe ask the question, how and where can I give joy? Can you be the sort of person who is, instead of constantly seeking to fill your tank with joy, can you become the sort of person who constantly gives joy? Because what I believe is that in giving joy, you discover the secret, that the joy God gives is a bottomless well, and that the more you give, the more you tap into. And finally, when life gets hard, when life gets challenging, when circumstances and situations are not going your way, instead of asking, God, why is this happening? What if we were to ask, God, how do you want to form me through this? Instead of asking why, ask, okay, this is happening. So God, how do you want to use this to form and transform me into the sort of man or woman that you've always called me to be? The team's going to come back up and we're going to sing and respond. And as we do, I want to leave you with an image that I hope will linger with you as you potentially go on this journey away from pleasure and toward joy in Jesus. I want to show you a picture. This is an origami piece called Ryujin 3.5, and it was designed and originated by one of the world's greatest origami artists, a young Japanese man named Satoshi Kamiya. Now, Ryujin 3.5 is like one of the most famous works of origami in the world. You can see how intricate it is, and it's actually quite large. They have one at a little origami shop in San Francisco. Now, here's the thing about traditional origami. Traditional origami allows you no adulteration of the paper. So this piece, Ryujin 3.5, this intricate dragon, is a single, uncut, unadulterated piece of paper. It's one sheet. It's one large, square sheet of paper. Not a single cut. Not one. Now, most origami artists, what they do is they publicly reveal what's called their crease pattern, which is the design. It's like all these lines that show you every fold in order to create the origami piece. This is the crease pattern for Ryujin 3.5. I'll show you up here on the screen, and you'll see how many lines there are. This is one giant, uncut piece of square paper. You can go on YouTube and type in Rugen 3.5 tutorial, and the tutorial videos, which are sped up, are 12 to 14 hours long. Most really skilled origami artists in the world will take between 2 and 4 weeks to complete this piece. Why do I show you this? Just because we sat here and talked about biblical joy for 30 to 35 minutes does not mean we're going to walk out those doors today and be people of immense godly joy. You're going to walk out these doors and you're going to open your phone at some point and begin doing the scroll, right? And you're going to find yourself tempted to compare and be contemptuous and a little despair, and then you're like, oh, I lost joy again. And if that happens, it's okay. Because experiencing the joy of Christ, living into the joy that God has to offer us, it doesn't happen overnight. It's like creating this beautiful, incredible piece of art. You just do one fold at a time. So my invitation to you is, can you begin to fold the joy of God into your life? Little by little. Just step by step. Is there one little thing you can change? Is there one perspective shift you can embrace? And as you begin to fold little by little by little, as you begin to enfold your life into the joy that God has to offer, you will discover over time, maybe over weeks, months, years, maybe decades, but you will inevitably and eventually discover that the joy of Christ becomes your strength. And it's able to sustain you and guard you and hold you and protect you and guide you and lead you through whatever life throws your way. Let's pray together. God, we thank you for the incredible gift of joy that you offer us. We're blown away that you rejoice over us, over me, over a sinful, broken person like me, like the rest of us in this room. But knowing that you do gives us confidence and it gives us courage. And we ask that by your Spirit you would infuse us with enough faith, enough trust, to place our joy in that which is unchanging, your goodness, your presence in our lives, your love for us, rather than on circumstances and situations and those sparks of good feelings that we so often find ourselves chasing. As we do, God, we pray that you would transform us into a people of joy who share that incredible joy with a joyless world around us. We love you and we thank you. Pray these things, Jesus, in your name. Amen.